Imagine spending months crafting a budget, raising taxes by £26 billion, patting yourself on the back for being fiscally responsible, and then watching the whole thing potentially unravel because of a decision that was supposed to have been sorted months ago. Well, welcome to Rachel Reeves' world right now, where a compensation scandal involving 3.5 million women is threatening to blow a £10 billion hole in her carefully constructed financial plans. And the best part? The government has been conducting all of this in complete silence, like they thought nobody would notice them potentially spending the equivalent of a small country's GDP. Spoiler alert, people noticed. Quick favor, if you are loving this, hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell. Over 94% of viewers have not yet. It is free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Cheers if you did. Now back to the show. Right. Let us dive into this absolute car crash of situation, shall we? Labor is currently facing demands to come clean about compensation for women affected by state pension age increases, and the whole thing has turned into a financial nightmare that makes your overdraft look like pocket change. We are talking about a potential £10 billion bill that could completely destroy Rachel Reeves' budget before the ink has even dried on it. Helen Whately, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, has come out swinging, saying, Parliament has been told nothing. The public has been told nothing. 3.5 million women are being left in the dark. Which is a very polite way of saying the government has been keeping everyone in the dark whilst frantically trying to work out how to avoid an absolutely massive financial disaster. Now, to understand just how spectacularly this could all go wrong, we need to talk about Rachel Reeves' budget from last month. The Chancellor raised taxes by £26 billion, which is a kind of number that makes your head spin if you think about it for too long. Part of that money was earmarked to pay for increases in welfare spending, because apparently the welfare bill was not eye-watering enough already. But here's a clever bit, or what she thought was a clever bit. Reeves also increased her so-called headroom from £10 billion to £22 billion. For those of you not fluent in Treasury speak, headroom is basically the money set aside for unexpected costs, the financial equivalent of keeping a tenner in your wallet for emergencies. Except in this case, it is £22 billion, which is slightly more than a tenner, but the principle is the same. Independent experts, including the rather serious people of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, have been urging the Chancellor to increase this headroom. They warned that the previous £10 billion sum kept in reserve amounted to a tiny proportion of the government's total budget. It was like trying to navigate a storm with an umbrella made of tissue paper. So Reeves listened, doubled her headroom, and probably thought she had been brilliantly prudent. Gold star for fiscal responsibility. Pat on the back. Job well done. Except there was a rather large problem lurking in the background, waiting to pounce like a particularly aggressive cat that has spotted an unattended sandwich. Enter the WASPy women. For those unfamiliar with the acronym, WASPy stands for Women Against State Pension Inequality, and they have been fighting a long and rather bitter battle over changes to the state pension age. Now, this goes back a fair few years, so let us do a quick history lesson. The government decided to increase the state pension age for women to bring it in line with men's, which on the surface sounds fair enough. Equality and all that. But here's where it gets messy. The WASPy campaign claims that these increases were not properly communicated. Millions of women apparently had no idea their retirement plans were about to be completely upended until it was far too late to do anything about it. Imagine planning your entire life around retiring at 60, only to discover at 58 that actually you will be working until you are 66. It is a kind of surprise that makes finding out Father Christmas is not real look like a minor disappointment. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, which is basically the official complaints department for when the government messes up, looked into the whole situation and recommended that compensation should be paid. They produced a report saying, essentially, yes, the government really did drop the ball on this one, and these women deserve to be compensated for the chaos. Which sounds reasonable, does it not? The government messed up, they should make it right. Simple. But here's where things get properly interesting. Ministers rejected the Ombudsman's recommendation. Liz Kendall, who was a Work and Pension Secretary at the time, came out and said in December of last year, given the great majority of women knew that the state pension age was increasing, the government does not believe paying a flat rate to all women at a cost of up to £10.5 billion would be a fair or proportionate use of taxpayers' money. Now, there's a lot to unpack in that statement, is there not? First, the claim that the great majority of women knew directly contradicts what the Ombudsman found. Second, and this is the important bit, she specifically mentioned that £10.5 billion price tag. The government knew exactly how much this could cost, and they decided it was far too expensive to bother with. Problem solved, or so they thought. But the waspy women were not having any of it. They launched a campaign for a judicial review, essentially taking the government to court to force them to reconsider. And this is where last week's drama comes in. There was supposed to be a court hearing to consider whether the judicial review could proceed. Everyone was geared up for a legal battle. Lawyers were sharpening their pencils, and the whole thing was about to become a very public and very embarrassing court case for the government. And then, at the absolute last minute, the hearing was cancelled. Not postponed, not rescheduled, but completely cancelled. Why? Because ministers agreed to reconsider the decision on compensation. Now, on the surface, this sounds like the government doing the right thing. Does it not? They listened to the concerns. They are having another look. Democracy in action. Everybody wins. Except here's the problem. They have done all of this in complete silence. No announcement to Parliament. No press conference. No explanation to the 3.5 million women who might be affected. Just a quiet agreement behind closed doors to reconsider a decision that could cost more than £10 billion. Helen Whately is absolutely right to be furious about this. She said, "Ministers have signed an agreement that could blow a £10 billion hole in the public finances, halving Reeves's fiscal headroom, and they have done it in total silence." And she is spot on. If the government does decide to pay compensation, that entire £22 billion headroom that Reeves so carefully built up gets cut almost in half overnight. All that fiscal prudence, all that careful planning, potentially gone in one decision. Let us put this in perspective for a moment. £10 billion is an absolutely staggering amount of money. It is roughly the entire annual budget of the Ministry of Justice. It is more than we spend on the Foreign Office, Commonwealth Office, and international development combined. It is a kind of money that could build hundreds of hospitals, thousands of schools, or fix every pothole in the country several times over. And the government has potentially committed to spending it without telling anyone. It is like your flatmate signing you up for a 10-year gym membership without asking, except instead of a gym membership, it is enough money to buy a small island nation. And here is where the politics gets really spicy. Labour came into power promising transparency, promising to be honest with the British public about the state of the nation's finances. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves spent months before the election talking about how the Conservatives had left the country in a financial mess, how they would be the adults in the room, how they would make the tough decisions and be straight with people. And now, faced with their own tough decision, they have apparently chosen to handle it in complete secrecy. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. Ms. Whately went further, saying, "This is a mess entirely of the government's making. Those promises collide with the hard reality of a multi-billion-pound bill, and ministers owe the country an explanation." And she is absolutely right. Labour made promises about compensation during the campaign, or at least they made sympathetic noises towards the waspy women. Now they are in power and faced with the actual cost of following through. They have gone suspiciously quiet. It is a political equivalent of promising to take everyone out for dinner and then discovering the restaurant does not have a value menu. The Department for Work and Pensions has been doing its best to manage the situation, insisting that no decision has been made on whether compensation will be paid. A spokesperson said last month, "We committed to retake the decision, and as set out, we will do so within 3 months." This should not be taken as an indication that government will necessarily decide that it should award financial compensation, which is bureaucrat speak for "we might pay it, we might not, but please stop asking us because we genuinely do not know what we are going to do yet, and we are hoping the problem will somehow solve itself if we ignore it long enough." But here's the thing, this problem is not going away. The WASPy campaign has dropped its judicial review after reaching an agreement with the government, but the details of that agreement have not been published. What did the government promise? What commitments were made? What timeline are we looking at? Nobody knows, because nobody is talking. It is like watching someone negotiate a hostage situation through interpretive dance. You know something is happening, but you have absolutely no idea what. And let us talk about the timing of all this, shall we? Reeves delivered her budget just last month. She raised taxes by £26 billion. She increased her headroom. She set out her stall for the next few years of economic policy. And now, barely a month later, the entire foundation of that budget is potentially crumbling. If she has to find £10 billion for WASPy compensation, where's it going to come from? More tax rises? Cuts to public services? Raiding the metaphorical sofa cushions in number 11? None of these options are politically palatable, and all of them will make Labour look like they have absolutely no idea what they are doing with the economy. The opposition is having an absolute field day with this, and you can hardly blame them. The Conservatives spent 14 years being accused of economic incompetence, and now they get to watch Labour potentially make an even bigger mess of things in their first few months. It is like watching someone criticize your cooking for years and then burn water when they finally get in the kitchen. The schadenfreude must be absolutely delicious. But let us not forget the actual victims in all of this, the 3.5 million women who are still waiting to find out whether they will receive any compensation for having their retirement plans destroyed.